Hello, I'm Dr. Brian Skotko, and I want to thank you for joining this Brain Train multi-series webinar. As many of you know, I'm a doctor, and I'm very fortunate to be able to take care of hundreds of patients with Down syndrome. I'm also very fortunate to be invited to Down syndrome conferences and workshops and parent gatherings around the country. And when I speak to so many of you, the top two questions that I am asked are, Dr. Skotko, how can we prevent Alzheimer's from occurring in our loved ones with Down syndrome? Or how can we boost cognitive skills in our loved ones with Down syndrome? I have been asked these questions so many times that I decided to do a deep dive into the literature to see what can we be doing right now. Yes, there are practical things that can we be doing, and I wanted to thank you for joining me for this journey. So I put together this multi-series session so that we could take this brain train together. And it's come into smart actions that might boost cognition and prevent Alzheimer's disease in people with Down syndrome. As many of you know, I do have a sister, Kristen. You could see her here with Down syndrome. I have no relationship with any pharmaceutical companies or with any industry support. So I come at this as a clinician and also as a researcher. I want to say that this is not going to be a series on how best to educate people with Down syndrome. If you're looking for tips on how best to arrange classrooms and curricula, I would highly recommend Down Syndrome International, where they have a great video series, and to go there. This is also not going to be a series on supplements or nutraceuticals. There's a whole other literature out there about there, and if you want my opinions on supplements and nutraceuticals, you could check out this website here where I've conducted an interview. Instead, these are going to be strategies that you could implement right now at home as caregivers of a loved one with Down syndrome. But in order to make this series, I came up with 5 criteria that need to be in place before I felt comfortable in giving these to you as recommendations. Number 1, what I say must be supported by quality science. I have access to all these medical journals, and I've combed through them to see what can we distill as a community that's built on grounded science. And I'm going to share with you throughout this series what those research articles show and what we could extract from them. Number 2, they must have practical applications for you at home. You could read about things in science, but if there's nothing we could do about them right now, then I put that on hold. But if I've read a research paper that's been validated over and over again, and I feel there's a real-life application that you could do in your homes right now, then it's going to make this webinar series. 3, it needs to be adaptable for people with Down syndrome. We don't have a lot of research on Down syndrome, but if there's been research done on Alzheimer's in the neurotypically developing population, and I feel that we could extrapolate something to people with Down syndrome, I'm going to tell you my thoughts on how we could do that. 3, whatever I'm suggesting must pose no risk to people with Down syndrome. There should be no side effects, no long-term effects, so therefore there are things that you could feel comfortable in trying, and the only consequence of trying is perhaps it doesn't work or it is not the most use of our time, but I believe that these strategies might work. And 5, whatever I'm proposing must answer one of these 2 questions. Might the strategy improve cognition, or might the strategy prevent Alzheimer's disease? So again, it must have quality science, practical applications, adaptable to the person with Down syndrome you know, pose no risk to their long-term health, and answer one of these 2 essential questions. If I feel like a strategy meets all 5 of these criteria, I'm going to give it to you in this 5-part series. Many of you might know that Alzheimer's disease occurs in an increased chance in people with Down syndrome. Here you could see a recent study that shows around the age of 50, up to 50% of people with Down syndrome could start to exhibit some of the signs related to Alzheimer's disease. That's far in advance of what the typical population shows. I know so many of you loved your loved ones with Down syndrome, and they've worked so hard in school, and we've come so far. The last thing we want to do is have Alzheimer's take away those gains. So what can we do to perhaps prevent Alzheimer's? There is no magic pill yet that has been proven in research to prevent or make Alzheimer's go away, but there are strategies, I believe, non-pills, non-medications, that can be done in order to mitigate or perhaps lessen the chances that Alzheimer's disease were to come. I'm going to call these smart actions. And in the series we're about to take together, each one of these letters is going to stand for a different strategy. S, socialize. We're going to talk why it's so important for people with Down syndrome to have good social skills. Move more. We know the more you move, the more physical activity, the less likely you are to have dementia. A stands for activate the brain, and we're going to talk about activities and games and things you could do at home in order to exercise that brain function and keep it healthy for people with Down syndrome. We're going to talk about the importance of reducing sugar and eating well, and what we eat fuels our brain, and while eating the right things can help, and eating the wrong things might not help. And T, we need to treat some medical issues. There are some medical issues that can be easily prevented and treated, which we know might exacerbate or hasten the onset for Alzheimer's. I know many of you are out there thinking, these are so common sense, I'm not going to get anything out of it. This is too easy. I would encourage you to hang in there, because sometimes the easiest things are hard to implement consistently and regularly. And I'm going to talk about what some of these recommendations are, and I'm going to give you real homework assignments to try to do on a consistent basis. There are some of you who are saying, this is so overwhelming, this might be too much for me to take in. I would ask you to come along. I'm going to give you a couple of tips, and you don't need to take all of them, but if maybe you get one or two things that you could do for your loved one with Down syndrome, hey, that's a boost. And then there are some of you out there who I call the challengers. You are the individuals who have read everything out there, who've taken it in, and are really looking for some extra credit homework assignments. Throughout this activity, this series, I'm going to give our challengers some extra things that they could take on. So I hope you'll join me for this brain train activities, and in each one of the next 5 series, we're going to tackle one of these letters one at a time. I hope you'll join me.